Vivian Harper lived a life most people would call simple. For decades, she served meals to children at the local school, waking up at 4 a.m. to prepare breakfast for them. A retired school cook now, she spent her days quietly in the modest home she had earned after years of hard work. The walls, adorned with a few photos of children who had long since left the school, echoed with the sound of silence. There was no one to share her meals with, no one to celebrate the simple joys of life. Her family, however, rarely visited, except for occasions like today. It was Thanksgiving, and the entire family was gathered. The house was bustling with noise, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. But Vivian, as always, was left in the background. Her nieces and nephews joked amongst themselves, the unspoken truth lingering in the air, that Vivian was the poor relative, the one who served food and cleaned up. The others, with their flashy cars and fashionable clothes, hardly noticed her. They never had. She wasn't seen as a person in their eyes. She was just a means to an end. But today, something was different. The atmosphere shifted when Sienna Montgomery, Vivian's niece, leaned over Vivian's shoulder to grab a plate of food. The screen on Vivian's phone lit up for just a moment, displaying her bank balance, a balance that was about to change everything. Sienna's eyes widened, and in that split second, the entire room seemed to pause. The laughter died down, and all eyes were suddenly on Vivian. A moment of silence, a dangerous silence, settled in the room. Vivian's heart began to race. What had been a quiet, humble life was about to be exposed. Sienna's voice broke the stillness, disbelief dripping from her words. "Vivian, is this real?" Her gaze locked onto Vivian's phone, then slowly lifted to meet Vivian's eyes. It wasn't shock. It was greed. "What is this?" Brock Hamilton, Vivian's nephew, demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. "You've been hiding this all along?" His words hit Vivian like a slap. The man who had never given her a second glance now looked at her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Grant Dawson. Her other nephew leaned in to get a better look, and the moment his eyes fell on the figure on the screen, a cold smirk spread across his face. "I knew something was off. You always were quiet about your life, never mentioned all this money. What else have you been hiding, Vivian?" he asked, his voice accusing. The weight of their stares felt unbearable. The room seemed to close in on her, the once comforting space now suffocating. Vivian's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to look away. She had worked her whole life to keep this quiet, to keep her fortune her own. And now, everything was about to come undone because of one accidental glance. She felt exposed, vulnerable, betrayed even. For years, her family had never seen her. They had never bothered to ask about her life, her struggles, her dreams. Now they only saw her as a source of money. A thief, they started calling her. How dare she keep this to herself? As Vivian stood there, all eyes on her, she could feel her internal world unraveling. Sienna Montgomery's voice, sharp with greed, echoed in her ears. "We're family, Vivian. You're just going to keep all this to yourself?" The accusation stung, but it wasn't just her wealth they coveted. It was her dignity, her years of sacrifice. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. She wanted to scream. She wanted to lash out. But instead, she just stood there, trapped in her own mind, paralyzed by the weight of what had just happened. The truth she had hidden for so long, was now laid bare. And she wasn't ready to face it. Vivian's internal conflict raged within her. Should she explain? Should she tell them everything? Should she reveal the truth about the inheritance, about how she earned her money? Or should she remain silent and let them continue their accusations? She felt small, insignificant again, just the poor relative who served food and cleaned. In that moment, Vivian made a decision. She was no longer going to let them define her. But the question was, how would she stand up for herself without losing everything she had worked for? Vivian Harper took a deep breath and slowly, deliberately began to speak. The room was tense with the weight of their disbelief, but Vivian knew this moment was inevitable. She had spent years hiding the truth, her success, her quiet wealth, but now there was no turning back. "I worked as a cook for 40 years, Vivian began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I woke up at 4 a.m. every morning, long before the kids even stirred. I worked through the holidays, the summer breaks, always there, making sure the meals were ready. Some of those children had no one else. I became their second mother, even if they didn't know it. She paused. The memory of those early mornings flooding back. She had always loved cooking. But it wasn't just about feeding the children. It was about the pride she felt in doing a job no one else wanted. That job had been her anchor, and unbeknownst to her family, it had been the foundation of her future. I saved every penny, she continued. I wasn't foolish with money. I invested in stocks when no one was paying attention. Things like technology, healthcare, even the electric car industry. Everyone thought I was crazy. They laughed at me. But I kept investing, and it paid off. There was a pause in the room. The family stared at her, incredulous. Brock Hamilton, who had never shown any interest in her life, scoffed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Wait, let me get this straight, he said, leaning forward. You're telling me that you, Vivian Harper, the school cook, somehow turned into a stock market genius? That's rich. He chuckled to himself, but there was no warmth in the sound, only mockery. Vivian's heart dropped, but she held her ground. I wasn't a genius. I was careful. I knew what I was doing. Sienna Montgomery, her niece, looked at her with skepticism. You must be joking. I mean, we've all seen how you've lived. How could someone like you possibly understand the stock market? Their laughter rang out, as if they were all in on a joke she wasn't a part of. The hurt welled up inside Vivian, but she pushed it down. Why are you so surprised? She asked softly. Just because I didn't live like you doesn't mean I didn't understand money. But the damage was done. They didn't see her as anything other than the poor relative who served food and cleaned up after them. It was as if her success didn't belong to her, as if it was all a mistake they couldn't fathom. Brock smirked again, shaking his head. I mean, you could have at least bought a house or something. Instead, you lived in that little shack. Vivian's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she refused to let their mockery affect her. She had earned her wealth, and no one would take that away from her. Vivian took another deep breath, the weight of her family's disbelief settling heavily on her shoulders. It was time to tell them about Augustus Blackwood. You think I've been hiding things, but there's more to it than you realize, she said, her voice unwavering. When I worked at the school, I wasn't just a cook. I took care of Augustus Blackwood, the owner. He was a sick man, and his family had all but abandoned him. I was the one who made sure he got his meals, that he wasn't alone in those final years. He didn't have anyone else. Vivian's eyes flickered with the memory of those late-night conversations with Augustus, the man who had once been a mentor to her, who had shared stories of his youth and his own rise to success. Augustus left me something when he passed, Vivian continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. He left me the inheritance. The school was his, and he trusted me, more than he trusted his own children. I took care of him, unlike his family. He knew I was there for him, not for his money, but because I genuinely cared. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Sienna Montgomery blinked, her expression changing from skepticism to a mix of awe and disbelief. You mean to say you didn't just work at the school? You were part of its legacy? Her voice was soft now, more respectful, but it still carried the echo of greed. Vivian nodded. He saw me as family, and when he passed, he left me everything. She paused, her gaze moving over her relatives. You've all been so quick to judge me. I worked hard for this, and Augustus trusted me. That's why I have what I do. Grant Dawson was the first to speak, his face softening, though the underlying tension remained. I didn't know, Vivian. I didn't realize. His voice was quieter now, as though he was beginning to see her in a new light. But there was something more in his eyes, perhaps guilt, perhaps the realization that he had underestimated her. The room's energy had shifted. Vivian wasn't just the poor relative anymore. She was someone with real value, someone who had earned everything she had. But as the family processed the news, Vivian could see it in their eyes. The shift wasn't just out of respect. It was the greed they had once hidden now bubbling to the surface. They saw her inheritance, not her hard work, as the real prize. The family's dynamics were shifting. Vivian could feel it. And while it felt like a victory, there was a bitter taste to it. They had seen her as less than them for so long, But now, they would see her as someone with power. She couldn't help but wonder how they would treat her now that they knew the truth. The family's mood shifted as soon as the shock of Vivian's inheritance wore off. It didn't take long for the demands to begin. Sienna Montgomery was the first to speak up. Her eyes glinted with an unmistakable hunger. "Vivian," she said smoothly, her voice laced with false sweetness. "I've been thinking. I could really use a vacation, you know? Somewhere warm like Hawaii or the Caribbean. It's been a rough year for me, and I've worked hard. You know, I always thought you'd be the one to help me out, being family and all." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze expectant. Grant Dawson chimed in quickly, not to be outdone. "Actually, Vivian, I've got some debts that are piling up. If you could lend me, say, $50,000, that would really get me back on my feet. You know how things have been? Business is tough, and I can't get by on my own right now." Scarlett Dawson, always the more composed of the group, crossed her arms and added, "And I've been thinking. College is expensive these days, and I could use some help. You know, getting a degree could open up so many doors for me. You could help pay for tuition, right? After all, it's family." One by one, they laid their demands on her, expecting her to cave like she always had. They saw her wealth not as something she had earned, but as something they were entitled to. The more they spoke, the more Vivian felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years: anger. For the first time, she realized the selfishness of her family, how they had never cared for her, only for what she could give them. They were no different from the others who had treated her as nothing more than a servant, just a source of something they could use and discard when they were done. Her hands clenched into fists. As she listened to them, the words slipping from their mouths like poison. "You want a vacation? You want money for your debts? You want me to pay for your education?" Vivian's voice cut through the room, sharp and clear. She paused, her heart racing. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. "You've never cared about me, about anything I've done. All these years, I've been the one who gave, and none of you ever thought about what I needed or wanted. I've been hiding my success, not out of shame, but because I didn't want to deal with this. But now you think I owe you something? Think again." The room fell silent. For the first time in her life, Vivian wasn't apologizing for her success. She wasn't shrinking under their judgment. She was standing tall, realizing that she had nothing to feel guilty about. "I'm not going to apologize for having something that you want. I worked for this. I earned every penny. You don't get to decide how I use it just because we're related. I'm done being taken advantage of." Vivian felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but the emotional toll was far from over. She had spent so many years quietly serving, quietly sacrificing, but now she was choosing herself. The silence that followed felt like a weight. The family was stunned, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. For the first time, Brock Hamilton opened his mouth, his voice laced with frustration. "Vivian, this is ridiculous. We're family. We've always been there for you, and now you're just going to turn your back on us?" His voice rose, his anger barely contained, but Vivian had had enough. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor, the sound loud in the tense air. "You've never been there for me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You've never cared. You all see me as nothing but a means to an end. Well, not anymore. I'm done with this." The room seemed to spin as Vivian's emotions surged forward. "You want to know the truth? All these years, I was the one who took care of everyone. I was the one who cleaned up after you, who kept everything together while you lived your lives as if I didn't matter. But I mattered. I matter now. And I'm not going to let you take advantage of me anymore." Vivian's anger boiled over, her voice growing louder, stronger, until she was practically shouting. The family recoiled, some with wide eyes, others with mouths hanging open in disbelief. She could feel the weight of their shock, but it didn't stop her. In one swift motion, Vivian picked up a plate from the table and slammed it down onto the floor. The dishes shattered, sending shards of porcelain across the room. The noise was deafening. Her family jumped back, fear and confusion etched on their faces. For the first time, they were afraid of her, not because of what she could do, but because they saw the power in her eyes. They saw that Vivian was no longer afraid. She was done. "Let's get one thing straight," Vivian said, her voice firm. "I'm not your servant. I'm not your meal ticket. I've given enough. You can all figure out how to live without me, without my money. I'm done being the person you think you can walk all over." Her breath was coming faster now, but her heart felt lighter, as if she had shed years of weight that had been holding her down. This was the woman she had always been inside, strong, defiant, unapologetic. The woman she was finally letting the world see. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Her family sat there, stunned into stillness. They had never seen Vivian like this. She wasn't the meek, quiet relative they had known. She was a force to be reckoned with. Vivian turned on her heel and walked away from the family, her steps firm, her resolve unshaken. She didn't look back. The morning after her outburst, the house felt stifling, like the walls were closing in on Vivian. Her family's faces still burned in her memory, each of them full of entitlement, confusion, and greed. They had never truly cared for her. They only saw her as a means to an end. And now they would never look at her the same way again. Vivian knew deep down that it was time to leave. She had spent her life under the thumb of their manipulation, their guilt trips, and their self-centeredness. No more. She would no longer be the person they expected her to be, the quiet, subservient cook who existed solely to serve them. She moved quickly, packing a small suitcase with only the essentials, clothes, a few cherished keepsakes, and most importantly, the little bit of freedom she had left. The decision had come swiftly, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. This was her escape, her chance to live for herself. She had spent so many years in the background, and now she was stepping into the light. As she prepared to leave, Miles Everett, her old friend, arrived. He was a quiet, solid presence in her life, always there when she needed him. He had never asked for anything from her, never manipulated her for his gain. Miles was the one person who saw her for who she truly was, not just as someone to use or dismiss. "Vivian, are you sure about this?" Miles asked gently, his voice soft with concern. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be here." Vivian gave him a small smile, grateful for his unwavering support. "I'm sure. I've spent too long living for others. It's time to live for me." Together, they moved through the house, collecting the last of her things. As they made their way to the door, Vivian paused for a moment, taking one last look at the life she was leaving behind. She had grown up here, worked here, and sacrificed here, but now it was time to move on. With one final glance, Vivian stepped outside. The air was cool against her skin, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. She wasn't looking back. As they left the house, the oppressive weight of her past seemed to fall away, leaving room for something new, a life of her own making. Her family would try to contact her, she knew. They would guilt-trip her, call her selfish, accuse her of abandoning them. But none of it mattered. She was no longer their prisoner. With Miles Everett by her side, Vivian set off toward a future that was hers to create. The first night in her new life was peaceful, almost too peaceful. After all the chaos that had consumed her for so long, Vivian sat on the porch of the small house Miles had offered her, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden hue across the sky. The world felt still, quiet, as if it were waiting for her to catch her breath. She exhaled slowly, her mind wandering back to her old life. She thought of the years she had spent serving her family, giving them everything they wanted and more. She had worked herself to the bone, thinking that if she could just give a little more, they would love her, appreciate her. But in the end, they had only loved what she could provide. Vivian's hand went to her chest, where the ache still lingered. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had given away until she left. For so long, she had convinced herself that living for others was noble, that it was the right thing to do. But now she knew that she had to live for herself, without guilt, without constantly sacrificing who she was for the sake of those who would never appreciate her. Miles sat next to her, his presence a calming force. They didn't need to speak. He didn't expect anything from her. He just let her be. It was in the silence that Vivian found her peace. "Thank you, Miles," Vivian said softly, her voice breaking the silence between them. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me. You've always been strong. I just want to help you find your way." For the first time in a long time, Vivian felt safe. She wasn't living in fear of being used or controlled. She wasn't afraid of the phone calls from her family that would inevitably come, trying to pull her back into their world of manipulation. She wasn't afraid of being alone anymore, because she realized that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. She had spent so many years afraid to live for herself, afraid of what others would think. But now she was learning what it meant to be truly free, and it felt like a rebirth. "Tomorrow I'm going to start living for me," she said, a determined glint in her eyes. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm going to figure it out." Miles gave a slight nod. "I'll be here for you, Vivian. Whatever you need." Vivian smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt like she was on the right path, her path. The weight of her past, the burden of her family's expectations, was no longer a shadow over her. She was ready to move forward, to create a life that was truly hers. As she closed her eyes and took in the quiet, peaceful night, Vivian felt a sense of liberation wash over her. She was free, free to make her own choices, free to be who she truly was. The future was wide open, and for the first time, Vivian Harper wasn't afraid to embrace it. The phone never stopped ringing. Day after day, Vivian was bombarded with messages, texts, calls, emails, each one more insistent than the last. At first, the guilt had gnawed at her, the constant barrage of pleas pulling at her heart. But as the days turned into weeks, the words felt less like requests and more like empty demands. Sienna Montgomery had been the most persistent, her messages a mix of feigned concern and barely concealed anger. "Vivian, please, this isn't you. You can't just walk away from family. We're in trouble. You need to come back." Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, her phone buzzing relentlessly in her hands. The texts piled up, each one a reminder of what her family had always wanted from her, what they had always expected of her. They didn't care about her. They cared about her money, her usefulness, her willingness to sacrifice. At first, the messages had stung. The accusations, the guilt, the thinly veiled threats, it all felt like too much. But now, as Vivian read each message, she felt nothing but a growing sense of empowerment. The weight of their words had lost its power. They had used her for so long, but she was done. They didn't love her. They loved what she could provide. Her family's love was conditional. As long as she served them, as long as she remained the obedient, selfless relative, they accepted her. But the moment she chose herself, the moment she stopped being their doormat, they discarded her. With every new message, Vivian felt her resolve strengthen. She wasn't going back. She wasn't going to let them manipulate her into giving up the life she was finally building for herself. She had spent far too long trying to please them, trying to meet their expectations. No more. She was done. She wasn't going to let their greed and manipulation define her life any longer. In that moment, Vivian made a vow to herself. She would no longer apologize for living for herself. She was worthy of love, respect, and happiness, not because of what she could give, but because of who she was. She was finally free to live for herself, and no one, not even her own family, was going to take that away from her. The phone calls from her family had escalated, but Vivian had decided that no more apologies were necessary. It was time to take real action. She had spent enough time running away from the truth. Now it was time to secure her future, protect herself, and ensure that her wealth couldn't be touched by her family's demands. She made an appointment with Jasper Cole, a lawyer she'd known for years but had never considered needing until now. Jasper was calm, methodical, and sharp, everything Vivian needed. He listened intently as she explained her situation, and for the first time in weeks, Vivian felt a sense of security. "Vivian, you've done well to protect yourself so far, but now it's time to take the next step," Jasper said, his voice reassuring. "You need to create a trust. That way, no one, not even your family, can lay claim to your assets without your permission." Vivian nodded, absorbing every word. She had never thought about legal protection in this way, but now it was clear that it was the right move. Jasper laid out the strategy: establish a trust, assign beneficiaries, and ensure that her wealth would remain secure, untouched by the people who had no respect for her. As he spoke, Vivian felt a sense of relief wash over her. For so long she had lived in fear of losing everything to the people who had tried to manipulate her. But now she was taking control. This was her decision, her future, and she was going to protect it with everything she had. Jasper advised her on the next steps: formalize the trust, draft the paperwork, and set up a legal structure that would make sure her assets stayed hers. As he explained the process, Vivian felt a new sense of power. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was taking charge of her life, her money, and her future. For the first time in years, Vivian felt confident that she could stand firm against her family's manipulation. She wasn't just a victim of their demands. She was a woman with a plan, a woman who could protect herself and her assets. Vivian had expected the calls to continue, but she hadn't anticipated the lengths her family would go to. When Sienna Montgomery and the rest of the family didn't get the response they wanted, they resorted to more drastic measures. They tried to involve the police, claiming that Vivian was mentally unfit to handle her own finances, that she had somehow become unstable and was acting irrationally by keeping everything for herself. The first call from the police was calm, too calm. Vivian's blood ran cold as she listened to the officer on the other end. "We've received reports about your mental health and your financial decisions. We're just conducting a wellness check. Please don't be alarmed." But Vivian wasn't alarmed. She was ready. For the first time, she felt completely in control. When the officers arrived at her door, they found a woman who was calm, collected, and resolute. Vivian greeted them with a firm handshake, showing them into her living room. She knew exactly what this was about: her family's attempt to take back control of what they thought was theirs. The officers began with their questions, probing into her life, her financial decisions. But Vivian answered each one with clarity and confidence. She explained the situation, from the inheritance to the trust she had set up with Jasper Cole. She told them how her family had tried to manipulate her for years, how they had only cared about what she could give them. As she spoke, the officers exchanged glances. It became clear to them that Vivian was not the one in the wrong. There was no evidence of mental instability, no signs of the erratic behavior her family had claimed. This was about money. This was about greed. When the officers finally left, Vivian was left standing tall, knowing she had nothing to fear. She had stood firm, defended her choices, and most importantly, she had trusted herself. The police had seen through her family's lies. They understood what was really going on. Vivian closed the door behind them, a feeling of finality settling over her. She had won. She had faced the accusations, stood up for herself, and had done it without fear. For the first time in her life, Vivian knew that no one could take away her peace, her independence, or her power. The family's manipulation had failed. Vivian was free, and she would never go back. After everything Vivian had been through, years of serving her family, years of sacrifice, she finally came to a profound realization. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, but now, for the first time, she wanted to do something that felt meaningful to her. She didn't want her wealth to be a tool for manipulation or a symbol of what others could take from her. She wanted to give it purpose. And so Vivian made a decision that surprised even herself. She would donate most of her money to the St. Michael's Educational Foundation, an organization she had supported quietly for years. The foundation was dedicated to providing scholarships and educational resources to underprivileged children, something Vivian had always believed in. For her, this was a chance to leave a legacy, something that mattered far more than her family's approval or their endless demands. The decision brought her peace, a quiet, profound peace that settled in her heart like a weight lifted. She no longer cared about impressing her family or trying to meet their expectations. Her wealth wasn't a burden to carry anymore. It was a gift she could use to make a difference. However, when her family learned of her donation, their fury was immediate. Sienna Montgomery called first, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Vivian, you've got to be kidding me. You're just going to give away all that money? What about us? We're your family. We've always supported you, and now you're just throwing it all away?" Grant Dawson wasn't far behind. "You don't understand, do you? You've got all this money and you're giving it away to strangers? You could have helped me. You could have helped us. His voice was thick with frustration, his words sharp and cutting. What kind of person does that? You've changed, Vivienne. But Vivienne was resolute. She wasn't going to let them guilt her into changing her mind. She had made her decision. I'm not giving it away to strangers, Grant, she said firmly. I'm giving it to children who will use it to change their lives. I've spent too many years giving to people who never appreciated it. This is my choice, and it's one I'm at peace with. Sienna, still furious, tried another tactic. Vivienne, don't you see? This is all about your legacy. Your family should be part of that, not some charity you don't even know. She tried to soften her voice. You don't have to do this. Come back to us. We can fix things. But Vivienne's voice remained steady, unwavering. I've spent my whole life trying to fix things for all of you, and all you've ever done is take. I'm done with that. I'm choosing something different now, something that actually matters. The family's attempts to manipulate her fell flat. Vivienne stood her ground, knowing that this was the right thing for her, no matter how they reacted. She had found something far more valuable than money, her integrity, her purpose, and the peace that came with living life on her own terms. Vivienne watched, in almost detached amazement as her family began to unravel. Sienna Montgomery and Grant Dawson were the loudest, their anger and resentment growing as they fought over the money Vivienne had given away. They were consumed by it, by their need for more, by the bitterness that had festered for so long. The donation, which Vivienne had thought would bring her peace, had instead become the thing that tore them apart. Sienna, unable to accept Vivienne's decision, railed against her. How could you do this? You had all that money and you just gave it away like it was nothing? You're throwing away everything we've worked for, Vivienne. Grant, too, couldn't contain his frustration. I don't get it. You were always so careful with your money. Why give it to people who don't deserve it? His voice trembled with anger. You could have helped me, Vivienne. You could have helped us fix everything. But now you've thrown it all away. For what? Vivienne heard their voices in the distance, their frustration and anger only growing. But instead of feeling the old pang of guilt, she felt something else, relief. She realized that they were never going to change. Their obsession with money, with control, would always be their downfall. They would never understand her decision, and that was okay. She thought about how far she had come, from the woman who had once cowered under their demands to the woman standing here, choosing to live for herself. The contrast was stark. She could see how her family had fallen apart, not because of her decision, but because of their own greed. The foundation they had built their relationships on had crumbled because it had always been about what they could take, not what they could give. Vivienne reflected on the transformation within herself. For years, she had believed that family meant sacrifice. That love was conditional, tied to what you could give. But now she understood differently. Love was about respect. Love was about choosing to stand up for yourself, even when it meant disappointing others. As she looked around her new life, she realized just how much she had grown. The peace she had found was no longer fleeting. It was hers to keep. Her decision to donate her wealth had not only helped others, it had helped her rediscover who she was. A woman worthy of love, worthy of happiness, and most importantly, worthy of living life on her own terms. Vivienne Harper had no regrets. And for the first time, she felt proud of the woman she had become. She had walked away from a family that had always taken from her, and in doing so, she had found herself free, empowered, independent, and that was worth more than anything money could buy. Time had a way of softening the sharp edges of things, and for Scarlett Dawson, the years had brought with them a deeper understanding of her actions, of the family she had once been a part of, and of the woman who had always been there for her. Scarlett reached out to Vivienne, her voice hesitant at first when she dialed the number. There was a quiet understanding between them now, something unspoken but deeply felt. The phone rang twice before Vivienne picked up. Vivienne? Scarlett's voice, softer than Vivienne had remembered, came through the receiver. It's me, Scarlett. Vivienne paused for a moment, the name stirring memories of years past, memories of the girl who had once been too young to understand the complexities of family. Scarlett, Vivienne replied gently, her tone cautious but welcoming. How have you been? A quiet sigh came from the other end of the line. I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About you. I know I wasn't there for you, and I understand now why you did what you did. You were right, Vivian. All of us were wrong. Vivian felt the sincerity in her niece's words, and for the first time in a long time felt something close to healing in her heart. Scarlett had grown, matured in ways Vivian hadn't expected, and her acknowledgement of the truth felt like a balm to old wounds. I'm sorry for how I treated you. For how we all treated you, Scarlett continued. I never understood. I never saw how much you sacrificed. But now I get it. You didn't deserve any of that. You were doing the right thing all along. Vivian felt a lump rise in her throat, but she held it together. This was what she had wanted. This understanding, this chance to heal. It's not too late, Scarlett, Vivian said softly. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are, just like I did. You're strong enough to stand up for yourself. Don't ever let anyone manipulate you. Scarlett's voice cracked slightly with emotion. I don't want to be like them anymore. I want to live differently. I want to be more like you, Vivian. I want to have the courage to live for myself. The words were simple, but they were profound. For the first time, Scarlett wasn't looking for approval, and she wasn't clinging to old patterns of manipulation. She was seeking something deeper, a sense of self, a strength that Vivian had always known was within her. I'm proud of you, Scarlett, Vivian said, her heart swelling with both pride and relief. You're on the right path, and remember, you don't need anyone's permission to live the life you want. As they talked longer, the bond between them began to shift. What had once been a relationship built on obligations and misunderstandings was now rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Vivian saw the spark of independence in Scarlett's eyes, something she had never seen before, and it filled her with hope for her niece's future. As Vivian Harper sat on the porch of her small, peaceful home, the sun beginning to set in a warm glow, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had once been a woman defined by the expectations of her family, trapped in a cycle of giving, serving, and sacrificing. Her life had been about what others needed from her. But now Vivian had reclaimed herself. She was no longer the woman who had allowed herself to be used. She was someone who chose her own path, her own happiness, her own purpose. Looking out at the horizon, Vivian thought about the children she had helped through her donations to the St. Michael's Educational Foundation, the scholarship funds that had already begun to change lives. These children, who had once been written off, now had the opportunity to succeed, to make something of themselves. Vivian had built something lasting, not for her family's approval, but for the future, for them. Her story had inspired more than just the children who would benefit from her charity. It had inspired women like her, women who had spent their lives in the shadows, living for others, never knowing they had the right to live for themselves. Vivian had become a beacon for those trapped in toxic family dynamics, showing them that it was never too late to change, to walk away from what was holding them back. She had made mistakes along the way, yes, but she had learned from them. She had forgiven herself for the years she spent in fear and guilt, allowing others to dictate her life. Now she lived with a sense of purpose that came from knowing she was free. Vivian smiled to herself, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over her. She had found peace, not in the approval of her family, but in the quiet certainty that she had done the right thing. She had chosen herself, and that was enough. Her legacy, she realized, wasn't just in the donations she had made or the scholarships that would change lives. Her true legacy was in the courage she had shown, in the example she had set. She had taught herself and others that it was possible to live with integrity, to choose independence, and to build a life rooted in love for oneself, not for the approval of others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Vivian leaned back in her chair, content. She had come a long way from the woman she had once been, and now, for the first time, she could say with certainty she was living the life she had always deserved. Vivian sat on the edge of her porch, the evening sky painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. Her quiet, peaceful home had become a sanctuary for her soul, far removed from the chaos and manipulation of her past life. The warmth of the evening air felt different now, more comforting, more reassuring. It was the warmth of a new chapter, one that she was finally ready to embrace fully. Her hands rested on her lap, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, savoring the stillness that surrounded her. It wasn't just the peace of the moment, it was the peace that had settled within her heart. She was free in every sense of the word. She thought about her journey, how far she had come. Just a few months ago, Vivian had been trapped in a cycle of giving and sacrificing, living only for the approval of others. She had allowed her family's expectations to define her, suppressing her own desires and needs. But now, sitting here on her porch, she realized that she had reclaimed her power. She was no longer the woman who bent to the will of her relatives. She had chosen herself, and it felt like freedom. It hadn't been an easy decision to walk away, to step into the unknown. The constant pull of her family's manipulations had torn at her heart. They had tried to guilt her, to pressure her into returning to the life they expected. They had treated her as nothing more than a resource, a means to an end. But Vivian had stood firm. She had made the hardest decision of her life, and in doing so, she had discovered the woman she had always been beneath the weight of her family's demands. The journey of self-discovery hadn't been without its challenges. There had been moments of doubt, moments when Vivian had questioned if she had made the right choice. The family's messages, their accusations, had hurt, but with each passing day, the pain faded and the clarity of her decisions grew stronger. She had chosen to live for herself, to stop hiding behind the veil of obligation, and to embrace a future that was hers to create. Vivian thought about her donation to St. Michael's Educational Foundation, the one act that had truly solidified her new beginning. She had given away most of her wealth, not to her family, but to children who could use it to change their lives. It was an act of kindness, yes, but it was also an act of self-liberation. Vivian had no desire to hoard wealth. She wanted her legacy to be one of purpose and meaning. She wanted to make a difference, not just in her family's lives, but in the lives of those who would carry her gift forward into the future. As she reflected on her past, Vivian knew that her story had only just begun. She had spent so many years looking backward, trapped in regret and fear. But now she looked forward with hope. Hope for the future, hope for the people she could help, and most importantly, hope for herself. Vivian's legacy: impacting others, inspiring change. Vivian's story had become more than just her own. It had inspired those around her, especially women like her, women who had spent their lives in the shadows of others' expectations. Her decision to live for herself had sparked a ripple effect, touching the hearts of those who had been trapped in toxic family dynamics, who had been conditioned to believe that their worth was tied to what they could give. Vivian had become a symbol of strength and independence. Her courage to walk away, to reject manipulation, was something that resonated with so many others. She had shown them that it was never too late to reclaim your life, to live for yourself, to find your own voice. And that was her legacy, the gift of empowerment. Her donations to St. Michael's Educational Foundation had already begun to make a lasting impact. Scholarships were being awarded to children who, without Vivian's generosity, would never have had the chance to attend college. These children, some from families who struggled to make ends meet, now had an opportunity to build a brighter future. Vivian had planted the seed for a better world, one where education was accessible to all, regardless of background or financial means. And as Vivian continued to live her life on her own terms, she knew that her true legacy would be seen in the lives of those she helped. Her wealth, once the source of family conflict and manipulation, had become a tool for good. It had the power to shape futures, to create opportunities, and to give hope to those who needed it most. Vivian's final reflection: peace and fulfillment sitting on her porch. Vivian felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. The breeze stirred the leaves on the trees around her, and the world felt calm, almost as if everything was exactly as it should be. She had walked through fire to get to this point, facing her family's greed, their manipulation, their anger, and yet here she was, stronger than she had ever been. She had let go of the need for approval, and in doing so, she had found something far more valuable. She had found herself The woman she was now was someone who had lived for others long enough. She was finally living for herself. Vivian thought back to the woman she had been. Before all of this, the quiet, humble woman who had spent her life giving, who had hidden her wealth out of fear of being judged. But now she was someone different. She was someone who had reclaimed her voice, someone who had learned that love, true love, didn't come from what you could give, but from who you were. Her phone buzzed again. But this time Vivian didn't flinch. She had learned to let go of the past. The calls, the messages, they no longer held power over her. She was done with that chapter. Vivian smiled softly to herself. She was free, and that freedom, that peace, was worth more than any amount of money, more than any expectation. She had finally built a life that was hers, and it was exactly what she had always deserved. As the sun set on another peaceful evening, Vivian Harper sat back in her chair, content. The journey had been long, but it had brought her exactly where she needed to be. And for the first time in her life, she could say, without hesitation, that she was proud of the woman she had become. The future was hers to shape, and with every step she took, Vivian felt more certain that she was finally living the life she was always meant to live.